So, at the end of last year, we decided to do a series of episodes recapping the crimes that had taken place throughout 2024. And these crimes usually didn't fit into our typical case framework because they had just happened, there wasn't much information. Also, these were crimes that were very high up in the news, and we typically like to focus on the ones that y'all usually haven't heard of. Now, best believe we will be bringing this back for 2025. But lo and behold, y'all have been on your worst behavior this year, and we already have updates to some of the cases that we covered in our recap. And because we want to make sure we bring y'all the newest, freshest information, we have decided to do a couple episodes dedicated to the updates and those recap cases that we did at the end of last year. If you didn't listen to those recap episodes, I don't really know what you're doing. You must hate us, but you're here, so we're confused. But anyways, don't worry. We will be doing a quick little recap before we get into the updates for each of these stories. So with all that being said, welcome to Criminalish, the update episode, part 1. But before we get into that, of course, Dev, I gotta ask, That's weird. There's someone at my door. 1 second.
Yeah, there's someone at my door too. Hold on.
What is going on here?
I don't really know, Cam. What is going on here?
So if you're not watching on YouTube and you're just listening on whatever platform you listen to the podcast on, you're probably like, what is going on? They must be already like 5-6 shots in or something. We're not. We're actually reacting because we've had a little bit of a change of scenery. Dev, explain to them what's going on for the people not watching on YouTube.
So, unfortunately, if you're not watching us on YouTube, you may not realize that we are in a new location and Cam and I are actually recording the podcast together for the very first time. And welcome to the new Criminalish studio.
Yes, welcome. And if you've never seen us on YouTube and I guess haven't listened to like half the episodes we've done, you may not know that we actually used to record in 2 separate locations in 2 separate states. So we're making this change because Devin has made a little change in her life. Devin, you want to tell them about that?
Yes, I have made a major change in my life. I have moved. And as a result of this move, Cam and I are now able to record the podcast together, which is super exciting because this is the first time we've lived this close to each other since high school. But I don't know if Cam really knows what she signed up for when I moved closer because I'm about to be over at her house all the time and getting on her nerves all the time.
Well, I know exactly what I signed up for because I'm about to be doing the same. But if you are watching on YouTube, thank you. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button if you already haven't. Also, let us know what you think about the new setup. Let us know what other things you might want to see in our new studio.
Yes, and another thing I will ask, please, please, please work with me on these first few episodes. It's a new studio, it's a new place, new microphone setup. Everything is completely upgraded for you guys as a result of this move. But also with that, I'm not exactly sure how the audio is going to come through, how everything's going to sound. And anybody who listens to the podcast knows that I take great pride in audio quality and everything else. But please be sweet these first few episodes. If everything sounds a little weird, just give me some time. I promise you I'm going to fix it. And we're going to continue to bring you guys amazing quality episodes that we're passionate about, that we care about, and continue to talk about the wild, wacky, and messed up.
Yes, we will. So before we kick off the rest of our updates episode, what we drinking, friend?
Well, friend, you brought it. So what are we drinking?
That's a great point. So before I get into what we're drinking, just so you know, we've decided to change it up a bit. Since we're now in the same location, one of us is going to be bringing the drink for ourselves and the other person. So today we are drinking Shiraz Harvest Sauvignon Blanc. I actually got this at the farmer's market from a Black-owned winemaking facility or winemaking company based in Maryland. So I'm very excited to try this Sauvignon Blanc.
Period. I'm also excited to try it, friend. Let's go.
And friend, cheers to our first recording in our new studio, and cheers to many more to come.
Cheers.
And cheers to our audience as well. Cheers. Okay, so like I said at the start of the video, this episode is going to be dedicated to updates on all of the cases I've covered from when we first started doing this podcast. So we are on season 3. I alone have done 24 solo episodes. So there was a lot for me to research and go through. But the first update I have is a small update on the Gardner Museum heist. So in March 2025, there was a viral video of FBI agents confiscating a stolen Rembrandt piece from an art gallery in New York. I know, that's what I said. And then I read further, and it turned out it was a promo for a movie that was being released that was loosely based on the heist.
Girl, I was about to get so excited. I was actually so hurt by that story. I'm sure everybody remembers how hurt I was by that story. Because I was really about to be like, oh my God, it is still in the United States.
Yes. And my bad, y'all. I promised that I would do a little overview of what the case was. So if you didn't listen to that episode, you definitely should go back and listen to it. It was like our second or fourth episode that we did. But essentially, back in the 90s, there was a museum heist of the Gardner Museum in Boston. And these people basically broke in the middle of the night, tied up the security guard, and stole a bunch of artwork within like 30, 45 minutes. I didn't research all the details of the case, which is why I'm keeping details very loose. That happened in the 90s, and to this day, they still don't know where those paintings are. And the Gardner Museum actually has empty art frames in place of where those stolen paintings were. So if you want more details, go back and listen to the episode.
Wow, friend. I can't believe you got my hopes up so high. I was really about to be so excited.
I'm sorry, girl. Okay, we're going to move on to our next case, which is actually from season 2. And this is an update in the attempted murder of Victoria Cilliers.
Oh, okay.
And so for our listeners or watchers who may not have listened to that episode, essentially, Victoria Cilliers was a mother of 2 who was married to a man named Emile Cilliers. And she was an avid skydiver. And one day she goes to go skydiving, and her parachute doesn't open. And she almost dies. The only reason she did not die is because she happened to land in some soil that had been freshly plowed, so it was all soft. So she lived, but she still had a lot of broken bones, and it took her like 6 weeks to recover. Now, people realized something was fishy because the way that the parachute looked, it literally looked like somebody had tampered with it. And people who skydive know that skydivers are very serious about their safety, and there are safety checks on the equipment like regularly, as well as right before you were actually about to go skydiving. So they're trying to figure out, how was this not caught? Well, her husband was the one who checked her equipment. Anyways, long story short, we end up realizing that her husband tried to kill her. He's now in prison. But Miss Victoria got married in October 2024 to her man that she'd been dating for like 3 years or something like that. According to the news article, this was a man in his 50s named Simon Goodman that she met at the skydiving club. But if you remember at the end of our episode, she was dating somebody, but it sounded like she's been friends with him for a few years. So it's possible that she'd been friends with him for a few years, but originally met him at the skydiving club. I think this is the same man that she was dating, but I'm not 100% sure because it didn't mention it in the article.
I'm fine with that. I choose to live in the reality where it is the same person because that's really sweet to me. Because if I remember correctly, that person nursed her back to health and kind of encouraged her to, okay, I don't remember correctly.
He didn't nurse her back to health just because I think they started dating a couple years after the whole ordeal. Because remember, she was thinking that it wasn't her husband.
Right.
So while she was recovering, she was still thinking that her husband had been framed or something. However, he did encourage her to go skydiving again.
That's what it was. Because that was about to be the next thing out of my mouth, was that he told her to get back into it. So I'm going to choose to live in the reality where it's the same man and I can be happy about that. So that's beautiful. I'm really happy for her. Congratulations to her.
Yes, congratulations, Victoria. Yes, Victoria, we're very happy for you and we wish you nothing but love, health, and peace. And now we move on to some of the juicy stuff, which is from our recap episode from last year. So, for context, at the end of last year, we did a 3-part episode focused on recapping all the crazy stuff that happened in 2024. One of those crazy things was the story of Mason Herring, a former lawyer who was sentenced to jail for poisoning his wife, specifically poisoning her with abortion pills because she was pregnant. He had a mistress and he didn't want things to get messy, I guess. And he made them even messier by going to jail for poisoning, whatever. So, as a result of him poisoning his wife, he was sentenced to 6 months in jail and 10 years probation and told to stay 500 feet away and cease any communication. However, he tried calling her twice in February. So, in May 2025, Mason was arrested for violating his restraining order. Yes. He apparently tried calling his wife, Catherine Herring, twice in February, and he was accused of violating the 500-foot perimeter twice during supervised visits with the children. One time, he waited in the lobby until Catherine pulled up, and another time, he showed up in a nearby vehicle while she was dropping off the children. This wasn't no accident. He knew exactly what he was doing, allegedly.
This case already pissed me off because I was always mad that he got such little time for poisoning that woman. Especially, this case was in Texas, wasn't it?
It sure was.
In Texas, where right now you couldn't get an abortion if you wanted to, he didn't get more time for actively trying to kill a fetus.
Literally.
Crazy work.
Literally. And luckily, for those who didn't listen to our recap episode, Catherine's baby did survive. She ended up having her daughter. And I didn't see an update on the daughter in the story, but I do hope that she's doing well and that Catherine and her other children are doing well too.
Absolutely. Because in all honesty, especially in a state like Texas, I'm not saying that I think this is right, but I'm surprised in a state like Texas where you can't get an abortion now if you wanted to, they didn't at least go after an attempted murder.
Right.
Because that's what it feels like.
And that's what they've done in other states when a woman has miscarried.
Hello. So what's good?
Literally. So that wraps up everything on Mr. Mason Herring. I'm not going to say what I hope for you, but audience, y'all know. Our next update is for the case of Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt, who were sentenced to 30 years for child abuse. Now, this is a case that I know Dev has spent a lot of time researching and going down rabbit holes on. So I know this update ain't news to you, but it may be news to our audience.
Exactly. We got to give the people what they want.
So for our audience, there are actually a few updates here. The first one being in April 2025, Jodi Hildebrandt filed for post-conviction relief. She said that her lawyer was ineffective, her plea agreement was unlawful, and that due process was violated. Womp, womp, womp. That was not granted. So the next update I want to talk about is from January 2025, a couple months earlier, when an ex-client sued Ruby and Jodi and alleged business fraud and encouragement of child abuse. So in this federal lawsuit, this ex-client alleged electronic fraud and that they promoted a methodology that encouraged child abuse. Apparently, this filer's wife still subscribes to their teachings, and he said that these teachings encourage physical abuse, and he connected those teachings with injuries that he saw on his daughter. And I think another note that I want to put here is that these training programs that people were paying for were priced between $5,000 and $15,000, and they also had monthly subscriptions at almost $100 a month. This was all connected to their business called Connections Classroom, and apparently they were cited multiple times for professional discipline. So I definitely want to see where this lawsuit goes, but it is insane that one, people are paying for this type of information and that they are encouraging people to physically abuse their children.
It's absolutely crazy that that's the case, but that's really how Jodi makes all of her money. Like, Jodi herself is an abusive person, and I feel very comfortable saying that because she has multiple victims. She's the aunt of a person she abused. She has multiple male victims, specifically husbands that she ran out of the home, because that lawsuit that you're talking about, that man and his wife started going to Jody when they had marital problems. And all of a sudden, he became the problem and Jody made him evil to the wife and basically told the wife, the only way that you're ever going to be right in the world and right with your life is you have to get rid of your husband. And encouraged her to cut that man out of his child's life and violate the orders from the court when he went to court and did it the right way to make sure that he could get access to his child. Jody actively, according to the lawsuit, actively told her to ignore that. And so I'm still surprised that this woman has access to the child at all.
Right.
Like, I don't understand how he has these allegations and he has proof. In my humble opinion, I think he has proof of these allegations because it's on the website that is still active. It's publicly available. All the information is publicly available. I cannot believe this woman still has access to this child.
And for those who maybe have never heard of Ruby Franke or Jody Hildebrandt, Ruby Franke was well known as a family vlogger on YouTube, and she would document her life raising her 6 children. However, all of that crumbled when one of her children escaped from the house and ran to a neighbor's house asking for food and water. When police investigated, they found a lot of evidence of child abuse, including malnourishment and physical abuse. But yeah, that's it on the lawsuit. Like I said, there's a few updates in this case. Another update, again from January 2025, was when Ruby Franke's daughter, Sherry Franke, the eldest of the 6 children, released her memoir telling about her experience growing up with her mother in the book called The House of My Mother, A Daughter's Quest for Freedom. Now, she details a lot in this book, but I'm just going to highlight a few things that she talked about in an interview with Good Morning America. One of those specifically focuses on Jody and how things changed when she came into the picture. Sherry said that when Jody came into the picture, the abuse became more psychological than physical. And when she decided to leave the home and move away for college, she was essentially disowned from the family. But even in this period where she was in the house and she was witnessing Jody's interaction with her mom and her family, she knew it was weird. She said that her mom was secretive about the relationship, and after her mom got arrested, she even found messages on her mom's laptop complaining about having to, quote, cater to Jody's needs for physical affection without getting anything in return, end quote. And at this point in her interview, she said that she still wasn't sure if they were anything more than friends. Now, another sad point that came from this interview was that Sherry had apparently tried to contact authorities about the abuse many times prior to when Ruby and Jody were actually arrested, but nothing happened. And I will say that the Department of Family Services has basically declined to say anything. They can neither confirm nor deny whether they received those complaints and whether they investigated them. But I'm going to believe Sherry and say that she did try to contact them, and unfortunately, nothing was done. And the last thing I'll say about her interview was that Sherry has said that she is now focused on rebuilding her relationships with her father and her siblings and being a proponent around changes to laws around family vlogging and monetization of children via social media platforms.
Yes, I am so proud of Sherry. She has gone through so much, and it sucks, like, her being the eldest and her kind of witnessing everything, because I haven't gotten a chance to read her entire memoir. It is saved in my Audible library. I was supposed to listen to it in the car as I moved up here, but things happen. But what I do know of it is how she talks about, like, these private moments of her life being violated. Like, getting her period for the first time was no longer a private thing. The whole internet had to know about it. And people coming up to her and interacting with her like they knew her because they saw her on the YouTube channel. And she did a really beautiful speech at, I believe it was a meeting for local lawmaking, something like that. I'm not exactly sure the title of it, but I watched her address to the council basically. And one of the things that she said that I thought was really powerful is there's no such thing as ethical family vlogging. And I fully agree with that. I don't think you should put your children on the internet. Like, on top of the fact that it is a crazy violation of their privacy, I'm so sorry. People are weird on the internet. We have talked about it on this podcast that some people are so crazy and weird and they violate boundaries and they do a bunch of crazy things that we couldn't imagine. And you're going to give your child access to that? Or you're going to give them access to your child's private experiences and life? That's crazy to me.
Exactly. And I think too, especially when the child has no say
Exactly.
in being part of that, I think it's different. I think there may be a different argument when the child is choosing to do that. Like there was that kid who was doing all the toy reviews. But even then, I wonder how much of that was him and how much of it was his parents. Another thing that I did see from that same speech she gave was that having your child be the primary breadwinner for the family from that young is just a lot to put on a child.
Exactly.
So there are many things with family vlogging. One, people are weird. Two, you're exposing your child to that many opinions that young. Social media is already scary for that same point, but having your child already be somewhat well known in social media is also scary. And I think another point is a lot of things / everything becomes for, oh, what would our followers think of this? Oh, well, we should do this because it will look the best. What if the child just wants to stay home a Saturday and watch cartoons? Well, that doesn't make for good content. So y'all got to go to Disney World or y'all got to go do this activity. It's just that everything becomes from the perspective of what would be the best content.
Exactly. And Jeanette McCurdy, I can never say her last name. I'm so sorry, girl. But she talked about the same thing in her book. I'm pretty sure her book is called I'm Glad My Mother's Dead or I'm Happy My Mother's Dead, something along those lines. And she talked about the same thing, how she was well aware that she hated acting. She hated acting. She wanted to be a kid, but she was the sole breadwinner for her entire family. So she could never stop. And to put that much pressure on an 11-year-old is insane.
Yeah.
Especially when you add the Dan Schneider of it all, but we don't even have time to address all that. But yeah, I'm so proud of her for taking those steps and trying to make things better and being a voice and trying to get things better. And one of the things I saw specifically about her calling CPS and letting people know that there was red flags and everything, I saw a very interesting argument about this online, and I kind of agree with it, and I would love to get your thoughts on it, which is they never did anything because at the end of the day, they were wealthy and white, and the household looked well put together. So it's harder to believe these children are being horrifically abused if they're in this big old house and the fridge is always full of groceries and everything is clean and pristine. Visually, people disconnect. And I thought that was really fascinating because I could see that. Like people being like, oh, what do you mean you're in an abusive household? Look at this nice house. Like the quality of the house does not have anything to do with the quality of the parent.
Exactly. And I totally agree with that. I think that is most likely, more than likely the case. And I think another layer on it is Ruby Frankie herself. She has the look of a good mom, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
Even though if you looked into her videos, there were some red flags there for sure.
Oh, don't get it twisted. People have been calling her out for abusing these kids for a decade.
Mm-hmm.
Long before the two children that she abused were even born. Because everybody was like, that's kind of weird. We don't like the fact that you took away your child's bedroom for a year because of a prank. That's weird.
Yeah. So the last update I have is a little bit more cheesemate gossip than it is update. But in February 2025, Kevin, Sherry, and the eldest son, Chad, starred in a 3-part Hulu docuseries called Devil in the Family, The Fall of Ruby Frankie. In this, what I want to talk about is how Kevin spoke a bit more about the quote-unquote strange relationship between Ruby and Jody. Specifically, he said Jody moved in because she was experiencing, quote, demonic night terrors, end quote, and Ruby and Kevin were the only ones who could get rid of these quote-unquote evil spirits. But soon enough, they asked Kevin to leave so that Ruby and Jody could continue the process without him. And then Ruby would start checking in on Jody at night because these were when the terrors were the worst. Thoughts, Dev?
Next caller. Look, in all honesty, my thoughts are this. So Jessie, who is one of Jody's victims and Jody is their aunt, and they have been very vocal about their abuse at the hands of Jodi and how they were abused in front of everybody and nobody said anything. They have also for a long time said that Jodi is kind of dancing around in the closet. And apparently, the tea on the street is, allegedly, that Jodi herself has said that she would never be in a sexual relationship with a woman. It would be for emotional support. Allegedly. That's what the streets are saying.
Okay, girl. And let's get one thing straight. There is nothing wrong with being gay, bi, queer in any way.
Correct.
The two things I'll call out here is, one, aren't they Mormon?
Of course.
And we know how Mormons feel about that, so it's hypocritical. The second thing is, it is very messy to be doing that in the same house with your husband.
Come on now.
You're already married. To allegedly be doing something like that in the same house with your husband is messy.
And the right situation is, I think this is only so much tea because they are Mormon. Because let's be real, if they were just your regular Christians, like this would be tea, but it wouldn't be something that we would talk about for real.
Right.
But it's because they're Mormon, and Jodi is very publicly a raging homophobe because she said some nasty things about queer people. But you would enter into a relationship with a woman for emotional support because that's what she decided. She decided the sex was bad. It's the gay sex that's bad.
Well, it sounds like Ruby was supporting something.
Hello. Allegedly. Per our attorney.
But anyways, that wraps up the updates on the Ruby, Frankie, and Jodi Hildebrandt case. Again, if you want to know more details, make sure to go back and listen to our recap episode. This was from part 1 of our recap episode last year. So the next update I have, still from part 1 of our recap episode, is on the Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow case. So y'all, this is a convoluted case. So I am going to give you a recap here. In May 2023, Lori Vallow was found guilty of first-degree murder in the case of JJ and Ty Lee, her children, and found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder in the cases of JJ, Ty Lee, and Tammy Daybell, Chad's wife, as well as grand theft. In July of 2023, she was given 3 life sentences. Now, in May of 2024, which is what we covered in our recap episode, Chad Daybell was found guilty of murder in the deaths of Lori Vallow's children, JJ and Ty Lee. JJ was 7 years old, by the way. Ty Lee was 16, as well as his wife, Tammy. He was sentenced to death on June 1st. Now, before I get into these updates, mind you, again, Lori Vallow is already serving 3 life sentences. So, in April 2025, Lori Vallow was found guilty in another murder conspiracy trial. She was found guilty of conspiring to kill her estranged husband, who died in July 2019 after being shot by her brother. In the trial, in which Lori represented herself, prosecutors accused Lori of working with her brother Alex to kill her husband Charles Vallow for his life insurance policy. Lori, on the other hand, claimed self-defense. She said that her brother shot Charles because Charles was chasing her with the bat. Oh no. The jury deliberated for about 3 hours before coming back with the guilty verdict. Another piece of tea here is that turns out Charles had already taken her off the life insurance policy because she had been acting crazy. So all that for nothing.
Yep. And not only did I watch this trial, but I also watched like the preliminary hearings and everything before it because I couldn't believe that this broad was bold enough to defend herself. But at the end of the day, she gonna rot for life anyway. So what she got to lose?
Right.
In that same vein. And what I thought was so funny is there's a point in the trial where the prosecution brings in the last woman that Charles went on a date with literally a day or two before he's killed. And Lori is cross-examining this woman and she's like, oh, so you just go out with married men and you were talking to my husband and you were doing things with my husband. This whole trial, she's like, my husband. And it's like, ma'am, one, you were actively cheating on your husband. This man was also like her 4th husband. Lori has changed her name like 5 times. And I'm not exaggerating. I don't know why people keep marrying this. But you were actively cheating on him. And it's even worse because you were having like spiritual sex in a closet with Chad Daybell. Yeah, that was a thing. I don't know if we ever talked about that on air.
What's mutual sex?
Girl, don't worry. I'll show you the text messages afterwards. And they're gonna talk about how he's so big, strong, and everything else. But she was feeling the energy while in her closet, and Chad would come visit her through her closet, and that's why she had to be in there so that they could have their secretive sex.
I'm even more scared now. Actually.
You should be.
Okay.
This woman is terrifying.
Yes, and just so y'all know, like, context to all this, her and Chad both were part of this like cult that had weird doomsday prophecies that also brought in like zombies and stuff. It was strange. You can read more about it. We're not going to go into all that here.
Yeah. But one of the things I did think was really interesting too is because Lori also brought up her children throughout the entire trial and kept talking about Tylee and JJ, specifically because she claimed that the attack started because Charles ripped the bat from Tylee, and then that's how the whole thing got started. And after the trial was over, I don't understand why the prosecution wasn't able to bring up her previous conviction, but several jury members did interviews, and they said that they were wondering why Tylee didn't testify because they didn't know that she had passed. And they said when they found that out afterwards that they were like, oh, we absolutely made the right decision, because what do you mean you killed your children?
Mm-hmm.
Because what do you mean you killed your children over this Peter Griffith lookalike? Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong right now, friend. I will put the image right between us. Tell me I'm wrong right now.
So anyways, our next update comes from June 2025, when Lori Vallow was found guilty in an attempted murder trial. This is trial number 2 of this year alone, if you're keeping count. So, after 5 days of trial and just 30 minutes of jury deliberation, Lori Vallow was found guilty of attempted murder and the attempted killing of her niece's ex-husband, Brandon Boudreaux, that took place in October of 2019. This was just months after her brother killed her husband, mind you. Prosecutors in the trial argue that this was just another piece of the plot by Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell to get rid of anyone she felt got in the way of her living with Chad and enjoying the payout from her estranged husband's life insurance policy that never materialized. So, in the trial, Brandon testified about seeing someone fire at him from a Jeep outside one of his rental properties and how he suspected Lori and her brother immediately. Prosecutors brought up location data, receipts, and video that showed Lori's brother Alex at the scene driving Lori's Jeep. Lori represented herself at this trial again and tried to cast doubt on every single piece of evidence, and she even tried to shift the blame to her niece, saying that she might have been the one who actually ordered the hit on him, and also that Brandon only blamed her because he thought that she was responsible for the divorce between him and her niece. And Brandon was like, we got divorced because my ex-wife had the same crazy views as you and Chad, and I didn't want a part of that because the last husband, who was with a woman with them views, ended up dead.
Come on now.
So yeah, are we surprised by this? Are we surprised by the fact that she represented herself?
No, because I knew she was going to represent herself again, because for some reason, Lori has decided that things are faster when she represents herself. That's what started all of this, because her first set of attorneys for the second trial, where she was being tried for murdering her ex-husband, they were asking for a delay to get started because they needed more time to prep. And she was like, nope, we're not delaying. So she was like, I will defend myself and we will go at our normally scheduled time. And everybody was like, all right, cool. As long as you agree to do this stupid thing, who are we to stop you?
It's funny that you bring up her wanting to delay the trials, because in July of 2025, she actually requested a retrial in the attempted murder trial because she claimed that her civil rights were violated. She said she was sick leading up to the trial and the judge still ordered her to attend. She claimed that she had a viral infection that made her weak, dehydrated, and nauseated. And she said the judge didn't let her submit certain evidence because it would, quote, open the door to her prior convictions, end quote, probably trying to save her.
Right.
Anyways, she, I guess in this case, did want the judge to delay the trial until she got better. Whatever. This request for a retrial was denied, and she is scheduled for sentencing actually in a couple days on July 25th.
Nice. Yeah, I hate this woman. I hate this woman so much. I have a special place in my heart for hatred of people who do messed up things to children. And so, yeah, this woman is evil. And don't get twisted, like Chad is evil for sure, but Lori is a different kind of evil because Lori is a different kind of manipulative because Lori still tries to act like she's a victim. She is the one who sat at her original sentencing and was like, I have been to heaven and spoken to my children and they are fine and they are happy and everything is okay. This is what she said at her sentencing. This woman terrifies me because the level of delusion is so rampant, but not rampant enough for her to be incompetent. She is with it. Especially if you watch like her pretrial information and all the stuff that she was doing pretrial, and she was filing all these motions and making good arguments. I have to give credit where credit was due. Sometimes she did make a good argument and then she would follow it up with a stupid one, but occasionally she made a good argument. That woman is with it. That woman is not incompetent. That woman knew exactly what she was doing. She is just delusional as hell.
Yeah, and I feel like I even saw something about a journalist who interviewed her, and he was like, that was one of the weirdest experiences of my life.
Yeah.
He was unsettled.
Yeah. I think his name is Sean Easton, I think is his name. I think his last name is definitely Easton, but I can't think of his first name. He's a great journalist. And he's the journalist who flew to Hawaii and was sticking the microphone in Lori's face and was like, where are your children, Lori? That's why I respect him. That's why I really like him. But yeah, that woman is crazy. That case is crazy. Chad and Lori, I hope y'all rot in hell.
Yes.
I pray that the rest of the family is okay, though.
Because I would hate to be connected to this in any way. And just trying to grieve the loss of JJ and Tylee and Tammy and having to deal with this foolishness, I would just want to be done with it. Like, let me grieve in peace, please.
Right, because it's sickening. Because you just can't allow these people to rest in peace. Even down to, how dare you make Tylee a part of your defense? How dare you?
So that wraps up our updates on the Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell case. Again, if you want more details, specifically about Chad Daybell's trial, be sure to go back and listen to Recap Part 1. So the next update, still from Part 1 of the recap, comes from the Rust shooting, where Hannah Gutierrez Reed was sentenced. So the first update is from January 2025, when Alec Baldwin sued for malicious prosecution. He claimed that the prosecutors were, quote, blinded by their desire to convict him, end quote, and alleges that they intentionally concealed evidence that showed he was not to blame. Now, for our listeners, remember that in July of 2024, the charges against Alec Baldwin in the Rust shooting were dismissed because of prosecutorial misconduct. So this was basically his follow-up to that, saying, yeah, y'all were basically just trying to convict me and y'all were doing some shady stuff to do that.
Which I agree with. And I hate to say it because quite honestly, I think Alec is a jerk. I think he's a jerk. I think he's pompous. I think he's arrogant. I think he's insufferable. I can't stand that man. But at the end of the day, I agree. Because at first they told him they weren't going to charge him. And then they did charge him. And then if I remember correctly, they didn't even really go through all the proper protocols because he should have been able to show up to his indictment hearing and give a defense and everything else, which he didn't do. And then you do hide evidence. And at the end of the day, the special prosecutor in this case, she pissed me the hell off because I realized something recently, and I will tell you about it in the next episode because it's an update for my cases. I realized recently that when you bring in a special prosecutor, specifically when the special prosecutor is a defense attorney, I don't like when you try a case like a defense attorney. Because at the end of the day, you are the state. You are the prosecution. You have the ability to take somebody's liberty away. You have the ability to lock somebody up forever. Your standards, in my eyes, are higher. So you don't get to be shady and hide the ball and yell at the defense and do a bunch of crazy things and talk about how the defense isn't proving anything because that's not their job. You don't get to do that. And that pisses me off so bad because you are a prosecutor now. Act like one. And she was incredibly disrespectful. And the fact that she argued with the judge for months about the judge dismissing the case, because even after she got on the stand and had to admit that, yeah, I did hide that evidence. What are we talking about, ma'am?
Right. All that rah-rah for what?
All the rah-rah for what? Because you did it. And as far as I know, Nothing ever really happened to her. I think she got put on the Brady list, which is like defense attorneys get to know that you hid evidence before and they get to use it like in future trials and stuff. I think that was the only thing that happened to her. I don't think anybody filed a grievance with her. I don't think anybody, moved to sanction her or anything like that. I don't know. I didn't follow that deeply. But I hate that y'all have made me side with the lesser of two evils in this case because I don't like either of these people.
Right. And I think what it really comes down to is he can be insufferable, arrogant, all of that. But your job is to prove that he is guilty of the charges.
Beyond a reasonable doubt.
Beyond a reasonable doubt. And my thing, too, is as a prosecutor, why are you doing shady stuff? You're risking your trial. That don't make any sense to me.
Thank you. It doesn't make any sense at all. And quite honestly, it's illegal.
Right.
It's illegal because you have more power in this situation.
You're risking your trial and your career.
Thank you. For what?
But as a counterpoint to Alec Baldwin suing the prosecution, in June of 2025, the Rust crew settled a lawsuit where they were seeking compensation for emotional distress from the producers of Rust, which included Alec Baldwin. They specifically accused them of failing to follow industry safety rules. And even though the defendants denied the allegations, the case was settled for an undisclosed amount.
Another situation where everybody got what they wanted. Because again, I agree, going into how much I don't like Alec, he did run an unsafe set. The set was unsafe. That's factual. Somebody died. You can't tell me that you're following procedures and protocols and everything, and then a woman dies
right
on your set. You can't tell me that. And somebody else is injured and traumatized.
Many people are traumatized because they saw a woman get killed.
Right.
And for our listeners who maybe don't know the details of the case, the reason Hannah Gutierrez Reed was sentenced was because she was the armorer on the set. And some reason, somehow, she brought live ammo onto the set, which should not be on a set. Live ammo has no place on a movie set where they are shooting guns that are not supposed to have live ammo in them. Point blank, period. But anyways, that wraps up the updates for the Rust shooting case where Hannah Gutierrez Reed was sentenced and the case was dismissed against Alec Baldwin last year in 2024. So the last update I have from part 1 of the recap is related to the murder of Lolita Hall by William Brock. For our listeners, this was the case where an Uber driver was murdered by a man who shot her because he thought that she was part of a plot to extort money from him. Essentially, some scammers had called him, said that I think it was his nephew, was in jail, and to get him out, he was going to need to give them like more than $10,000. And they basically said somebody was going to show up to collect the money from him. And they ordered an Uber driver you can use to pick up packages. That Uber driver happened to be Lolita Hall. And when she showed up, this man in his 70s or 80s, William Brock, basically would not let her go. And after a certain point, she was like, okay, I don't need whatever package I'm supposed to get from you. I will just leave. He wouldn't let her go. And he shot her. And unfortunately, she passed away. So in March of 2025, a lawsuit from Lolita Hall's family demanded $25,000 in damages for harm caused by William Brock and 5 John Does. And unfortunately, that is all that they wrote in the update. Because a key part of this case is that William Brock, of course, was arrested for the murder. However, police did know that there were scammers who were part of this plot. One of them even spoke on the phone with the police officer before they realized she was the police. So there were definitely other people involved in this and people who really are the primary ones responsible for Lolita Hall's death. We just don't know who they are for some reason. They aren't releasing their names or their information.
Oh, they're minors. They're minors for sure. Allegedly. Oh, God dang it. Okay. One, that's the worst update ever. I will say though, and maybe I'm just greedy. Only 25,000? Maybe I'm greedy because I'm so sorry. If something like that happened to somebody I know, I will own everything you've ever touched in your life. That house is mine. That dog in there is mine. That car is mine. That street is renamed after me. Like, I'm going way harder. But no, if they're not releasing any of their information, they sound like minors.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, which is crazy. I mean, I know kids do crazy stuff. And from what I remember from the case, I think the call was coming from out of state or something, but I can't remember that exactly. So don't quote me on that.
Well, I will tell you this at least. I hope it's not out of state, because if it is out of state, now we get the feds. And you're extra fucked, buddy, if we have to call the feds.
I will say one mini update that I chose not to originally include in here was that William Brock's attorneys have tried to subpoena the FBI to testify about the extortion because the FBI is aware of the extortion. So it sounds like the feds are involved.
I highly doubt they're going to get anywhere with that, because I've never heard of a case where the feds have been subpoenaed and they show up.
Yeah, they've definitely denied the motion. So I don't think it's happening. But all that to say, the feds are involved in some manner.
Oh my God. I'm so terrified now, because in my head, I see 5 stupid kids between the ages of 14 and 17 who are doing something stupid and thought it was going to be funny. And now somebody died.
Yeah. Or not even thought it was going to be funny. They thought they would make some quick money taking advantage of an old man.
Yeah.
And some Uber driver who didn't know what she was getting into.
Yeah. I think the thing that still pisses me off the most about this case, though, is the fact that she wanted to leave and he held her hostage.
Yes.
That's my main thing. Like, that's the one thing I do hope, is that he gets his day in court and then he gets some time in jail. I don't care if he's 80. He can die there. He didn't care when he killed that other woman. Why do I care if he dies in prison?
Right. Because that's where self-defense ended.
Exactly. Because she tried to leave and you held her hostage. You were no longer a victim once you hold her hostage.
Mm-hmm. So that wraps up the update on that case. Now we're going to move into part 2 of our recap, which covered things that happened a little bit later in 2024. So the next update we have is from the case of Matthew Perry's death. For our listeners, Matthew Perry, who was most well known for his role as Chandler in the TV show Friends, unfortunately passed away in 2024 after overdosing on ketamine. Now, what was discovered in this case was that his ketamine addiction was being fed and encouraged by not only his assistant, but also by his doctor. And that doctor, Dr. Salvador Plasencia, agreed to plead guilty in June of 2025. He is specifically agreeing to plead guilty to 4 counts of distribution of ketamine, which carries a maximum sentence of 40 years in federal prison. And he has admitted that he acted against the standards of medical care in dealing with Matthew Perry.
Well, there you go. I'm happy that he just admitted it, quite honestly, because though the true crime nerd in me would love to hear the defense's argument to this crap in court, the human in me is happy that we're going to lay this to rest and you're going to take responsibility, accept your fate, and allow the family to grieve.
Right. Exactly. So our next case update is one that I'm sure you and many of our listeners and watchers have been following closely. And that is when on June 30th, 2025, Brian Koberger agreed to plead guilty to 4 counts of murder and 1 count of burglary, waiving his rights to an appeal in exchange for the prosecution taking the death penalty off the table. He ended up entering this plea on July 2nd, 2025.
Yep. And his sentencing hearing is tomorrow at the time of this recording. And I will be tuned in with my box of tissues, ready to cry all day. And this plea really shocked me. I did not anticipate that. But I think at the end of the day, the only thing they were going to trial for was so that he didn't get the death penalty. Even the little bit of evidence that we had in the public was overwhelming.
Yeah.
And again, this comes down to like the human part of me is like, okay, it's done. He's waived his appeal rights. And especially too, if he did get the death penalty, he could appeal that for decades and be on death row for decades and drag the families back into court for decades. That would just be their reality. So he doesn't get to do that. And the families get to grieve. It is my understanding that not all of them are happy about the plea deal, but that some of them are. And my big thing is I hope this gives them some peace, the community some peace. Again, the true crime person in me wants to see all the evidence that we just don't have.
Yeah.
And we're not going to see those text messages. We're not going to see all that location data. We're not going to see the alleged memoirs and other things that he posted and all this other stuff. But again, the human in me is also like, well, now they're surviving. Roommates don't have to testify. They don't have to face him or see him again. The families don't have to sit through what was going to be months of trial of the defense digging into the past of their children or trying to make them seem like bad people or anything like that. Like, none of that gets to happen. And so, though the true crime part of me was disappointed, the human part of me is very content with this seeming to have an ending.
Yeah.
And again, he's going to get life, finite life. I saw a lot of people online talking about how, oh, if he takes his plea deal, he gets the opportunity for parole. No, he doesn't. He gets a fixed life sentence. Fixed. Meaning the only way he's getting out is in a body bag. That's it. So I think that's the best outcome we could have, is that we guarantee that that man dies in prison. Unfortunately, us taxpayers are going to have to pay to keep him alive. But also, I'm not encouraging it, but there could be a wee bit of street justice once he get there. All I'm saying.
We're not encouraging. We're just saying it's possible. It could happen.
Could happen to anybody.
Right. And I'll say too, on the plea deals, I also saw similar things where I think it was Kaylee Gonsalves' family that was unhappy with the outcome. Specifically, they were unhappy that they hadn't been consulted. And I think what's difficult in cases like this is you have 4 families to consult. It's not just one. And when those 4 families want different things, it's hard to deal with that and then try to come up with a plea deal that pleases the defense as well as pleases the families.
And the prosecution also has to weigh what's the best for the state of Idaho. And is it best for the state of Idaho to pay for and put on hold for 4 months of trial? Because that's what it was getting ready to be. That trial was not going to be done this year.
Yeah.
And again, the big piece for me that just really, really put me at peace with this is knowing that the surviving roommates don't have to testify. I think that's such a weight off of them. They don't need the weight of having to testify and then having the public having every eye on them through their testimony. And, oh, I don't know, she put her hand behind her ear and what does that mean and everything else.
Exactly, because before he was arrested, they tried to blame them because essentially they thought something was wrong that night, but the police didn't actually come into that morning because they were scared to check it out. And something that I also found out through listening to another podcast about this was that this wasn't the first time that that roommate had thought that somebody was in the house or that something was weird. So I'm sure she was telling herself, no, it's nothing. I was hallucinating. Maybe somebody had someone over last night, whatever. Even though my roommates aren't answering, something feels weird. It can't be that.
Right.
Even when somebody initially called the police, they said, oh, one of the roommates is like passed out, isn't waking up. And, oh, this girl thinks she saw somebody in the house last night. They didn't think somebody was in the house. I think he killed my roommates at first. It was, this was weird. Somebody was in the house. I thought I heard crying. Like, things just feel off. And it would add so much to the trauma they already have to have to go on trial and testify. And I can only imagine what the defense would do in this case. But the main reason I think he chose this plea deal is because serial killers do want attention, but they are so afraid of death.
I agree with that completely. Because at the end of the day, every serial killer is a and I say that with my full chest.
Mm-hmm. So that wraps up the latest updates on the Kohberger trial. I don't know if I will watch the full sentencing hearing because, again, this was a very traumatic case. It affected so many people from many standpoints, even from a financial standpoint. The money that the Moscow police had to spend investigating this case actually had a deep economic impact on the town because they had not budgeted for something like this. They never dealt with something like this. So even aside from the emotional impact this has had on the students who went to the school, the friends of those 4 students, Kaylee Gonsalves, Madison Mogan, Zana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, even aside from all that, this has touched so many people's lives. And I am glad that at least this part of it is over.
Absolutely.
So the next update I have, we're actually going to skip all the way to part 3 of our recap. Didn't have that many for part 2. The next update I have is from the death of Liam Payne, a former member of the band One Direction who died after falling off his balcony in a hotel in Buenos Aires, Argentina. So in January 2025, 5 people were charged in connection with his death. Liam's representative, quote unquote, the hotel manager, and the head of reception were charged with manslaughter as a result of negligence and were facing up to 5 years in prison. A hotel employee and waiter were also charged with giving cocaine to Liam and were facing up to 15 years. The hotel manager was specifically accused of witnessing Liam Payne being intoxicated and facilitating his transfer to a room with a balcony, which the hotel manager was saying basically you knew he was intoxicated and you moved him to a room with a balcony. You knew what could have happened, which my take is hindsight is 2020, but I'm going to move on. The receptionist was charged with guiding the group of people who carried the unconscious Liam to his room. And the quote-unquote representative's charge came from leaving the hotel an hour before his fall, despite knowing he was very intoxicated. Now, I think, we can say, okay, these actions led up to or contributed to him eventually falling from the balcony. I do think it's hard to bring up the charge, and I'm not too familiar with Argentina's laws on this, but from my perspective, it's hard to say, okay, you were intentionally negligent in this case. And that actually brings me to the next update, which was in May 2025, the charges were dropped against these 3 people. However, the charges against the 2 people who gave him cocaine are still active.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't know how Argentinian law is written, because in the United States, negligence can rise to criminality without intention, especially if it is just so blatant that you knew something bad could happen. And I don't know if this case specifically rises to that either. But I also take all of this with a grain of salt, because in my heart of hearts, I just don't believe he fell. And I can't get past that part of it. I don't believe he fell. I still believe he was pushed. Or if he wasn't actively pushed, I do believe that somebody didn't care when he went over that balcony. And that is the part of this that I just can't let go, because it doesn't make any sense to me. It's not a short balcony. It's not.
Yeah. And I think where I could potentially see is if he was hallucinating.
Yeah.
But from the negligent standpoint, I feel like why I did question it is because I think of it from the perspective of the hotel manager and receptionist. This is probably not the first time they've seen somebody extremely drunk, and their main focus is, okay, we got to get them out. This is probably a nice hotel. He's causing a ruckus for all our other rich clients. This isn't the first time one of our rich clients has gotten a little too wasted. All right, we're going to send you back up to your room that you've already booked. And from the friend's perspective or the representative's perspective, it probably isn't the first time that they've seen Liam in this way. And even though you're probably not being a great friend to leave them while they're intoxicated, that's where I was like, okay, I don't think that's negligence to the point of manslaughter.
Yeah.
But it is a really sad case because there were things that could have been done to prevent this. And that's why I think it's still right for those 2 people to be charged with providing the cocaine, because that is what ultimately contributed to his death.
I agree. And it just makes me so sad. He has a kid. He has a kid that has to grow up without him now. Yeah, I hate this case. I really, really hate it, because it makes me sad. And because every time I look into it, I never look into it super deeply, because I feel like I fall down that rabbit hole of it's just not smelling right. Something about this whole case reeks to me. And I can't put my finger on it, but it reeks. But it's stankin'.
Mm-hmm.
Stankin' like hell. Because even another part of this that really bothered me about this case is there's no security footage. Because if this is a nice hotel, you tell me that y'all don't have cameras outside? I don't buy that. I don't believe that. Because there was no cameras of what Diddy was doing to Cassie either.
And there are no cameras outside of Jeffrey Epstein's cell either.
Come on now. There weren't cameras there either.
Except on the cell that was like upstairs and across the hall. That's a whole nother thing.
We have to do a whole Patreon episode where we just talk about Jeffrey. Because I need to rant about this. I'm gonna need to be loud. I'm gonna need to be ignorant. I'm gonna need to say every 4-letter word that YouTube and everything else doesn't like, because I have thoughts and I have feelings, and a lot of them.
And I have speculations. And I'm going to get sick and tired of saying allegedly. So we definitely going to need to put that on the Patreon.
Come on now.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to put one blanket alleged and we're going to just talk.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I really do hope that we can get more answers at the very least. And beside all of it, I do hope that Liam's family and his friends and his loved ones do have some sort of closure in this case.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that wraps up the update on the Liam Payne case. There are still 2 people being charged in connection with his death for supplying him cocaine. However, the 3 charges were dropped in connection with the manslaughter charges resulting from negligence. So the last update we have from our part 3 recap was related to the United Health CEO shooting. That happened less than a year ago. That feels like it happened 5 years ago. But that's just because it's been a long 6 months, long 7 months, really.
Yep.
But specifically, this update comes from July 2025 when attorneys for Luigi Mangione accused prosecutors of illegally obtaining medical records. So, the defense specifically claimed that the prosecution had, quote, improperly compelled, end quote, Aetna to release Luigi Mangione's medical records directly to its office, quote, without facilitation from the court, end quote. They said that in retrieving these medical records, they made up a court date and used a fraudulent subpoena to do so, making Aetna think that not complying would be in contempt of court. In response, the DA claimed that they'd requested limited information from Aetna and that Aetna sent them additional materials by mistake. They then claimed that they deleted this information when they realized the error and also brought it to the defense and court's attention. The defense is asking that the court hold an evidentiary hearing and that they get access to all communications between the DA and Aetna.
Ooh, the tea is hot between the insurance companies.
Girl, is hot.
The girls are fighting.
The girls are fighting, and we have not even made it to the federal trial yet or the state trial.
Oh, dude, that's stuff that's going to happen in a year or two. We're not going to be able to talk about that for a while.
Right.
But, ooh. Edna said, we're a better insurance company, so we going to release everything. We just going to give y'all everything.
Allegedly.
Per the attorney.
Per the attorney. But per the defense attorney, the prosecution was doing some shady stuff, because that is shady if you bypass the court to get medical records.
Because also, one of the things I've learned while watching Emily D. Baker talk about cases and everything else is it's always interesting to talk about the arguments that you don't address, because they claim that you made up a date to get records for, and you ain't say nothing about that date that was made up according to the attorneys.
Ain't said nothing about a fake subpoena that was made up according to the attorney. So let's hope that evidentiary hearing can happen sooner so we can talk about it.
No, facts, because that's so messy.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's the real tea too. You delete everything. You have it now, honey. I'm pretty sure you are forced to give that to the defense now. You have it. You can't just delete it. That sounds like something that can get your case dismissed.
But yeah, y'all, like that said, this trial ain't gonna happen for a minute. Either one of them.
Hello.
But yeah, so that's all the updates we have thus far in the case of Brian Thompson, the United Health CEO who was allegedly shot by Luigi Mangione. Now, Dev, our last update is from one of our more recent cases, the case of Serenity Holland. So Serenity Holland was a bright, loving 7-year-old girl who was unfortunately taken too soon in a vehicular homicide. Specifically, in this case, she was being driven home by her mother along with another young family member when a car going 30 miles over the speed limit, 95 and a 65, came up on their car and tried to switch lanes and ended up hitting them. Unfortunately, Serenity did not survive this crash. And this happened in July of 2024. And 10 months later, on May 22nd, 2025, Quintarius Donald was arrested and charged with vehicular homicide and driving with a suspended license. When I covered this case, I did not say his name because he had not been charged yet. However, now that he has been charged, I can say Quintarius Donald is the one who is driving that car. Quintarius Donald is the reason that Serenity Holland is dead. And I am very much looking forward to the updates in this case and to see how those charges materialize towards a conviction. Because mind you, Quintarius Donald had a very bad driving record. He was only like 21, 22 years old when this happened, and he already had his license revoked, speeding tickets. His mother was the one whose name was on that car, and for some reason she was letting her son drive it despite knowing his driving record.
Come on now, because he also had a DUI.
Right.
I will never forget that crap. You have a DUI at 21? Sir, come on.
Come on. Ridiculous.
Ridiculous indeed. And I too am happy that he's been arrested. I too will be paying close attention to this case to make sure that Serenity's family gets the justice that they deserve, especially for somebody who is so reckless and clearly doesn't care, and whose mother also doesn't care. But you actually want to know the tea that I'm looking forward to in that? I wonder if he has a public defender or not. Because that's going to tell me where mom places her priorities.
Mm-hmm.
That will just confirm for me that she is the root of all evil.
Mm-hmm.
Is this woman enabling all of her son's BS, especially if you go get an expensive attorney.
Right.
Because the public defender's office will happily take his case. So.
Exactly. So that wraps up the updates that I have for all the episodes I've covered, the 20 plus episodes I've covered in the almost 3 years that we've been doing this podcast. And I am really looking forward to hear the updates from your side, Dev audience. I know y'all looking forward to that too, but you got to wait a week to hear that.
You do. And I'm going to go ahead and spoil a couple of things. I got some bombshell updates for y'all. Some updates that when I went back and started researching them, I couldn't believe that these things happened like they did. So make sure you're tuned in for next week. Make sure that your notifications are on, that you're subscribed, you follow, all of that good stuff.
Right.
Because especially if we go back to some of the cases I covered before the recap, we got a lot of updates in those cases, girl.
I'm set. I am set.
We're now going to move into our segment called Today in Crime, where we'll discuss a crime or a crime-related event that took place on this day. On July 25th, 1972, the Associated Press broke the story of the Tuskegee syphilis study. So, on July 25th, 1972, Jean Heller, a reporter on the Associated Press investigative team, then called the Special Assignment Team, broke news that rocked the nation. Based on documents leaked by Peter Buxton, a whistleblower at the U.S. Public Health Service, the then 29-year-old journalist and only woman on the team reported that the federal government let hundreds of black men in rural Alabama go untreated for syphilis for 40 years in order to study the impact of the disease on the human body. Most of the men were denied access to penicillin, even when it became widely available as a cure. A public outcry ensued, and nearly 4 months later, the, quote, Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male, end quote, came to an end. The investigation would have far-reaching implications. The men in the study filed a lawsuit that resulted in a $10 million settlement. Congress passed laws governing how subjects in research studies were treated, and more than 2 decades later, President Bill Clinton formally apologized for the study, calling it, quote, shameful. Today, the effects of the study linger, as it is often blamed for the unwillingness for some African Americans to participate in medical research. And that is what happened in crime today. If you found this story interesting, please leave a test tube emoji in the comments.
Well, Dev, thank you for giving that update. That is wild. And honestly, not just for Black people's unwillingness to participate in medical research, Black people's unwillingness to go to hospitals, to receive regular medical care. Unfortunately, the Tuskegee syphilis study was just one example of people in the medical field abusing and misusing Black people's bodies without our consent.
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest things to come out of that is not only do we not participate in this research, but at the end of the day, we as people of color do have different medical issues and different things that we need assistance for and that aren't researched and aren't studied because there is a severe lack of trust, which is valid.
Right. Completely valid.
So yeah, if you're ever yelling at your grandfather because he won't go to the hospital, this is why. My father was born in 1972. My grandparents were full-fledged adults in 1972.
Yeah, my grandparents were almost 30 years old in 1970.
Exactly. So they can remember that vividly.
Any other thoughts, friend?
Nope, that's all I've got.
Well, thank you to our listeners for joining us on our first episode from our new Criminalish studio. And there are way too many sources for me to thank in researching and writing all these updates. However, if you would like to check out photos related to these updates, be sure to follow us at Criminalish Podcast on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
Listeners, if you like what you hear, be sure to leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening to the Criminalish Podcast. And if you're listening on YouTube, welcome to the new studio. Please be sure to subscribe and leave any comments or questions. As always, stay nosy, my friends. Bye.
Bye.